The muscle car era was all about raw power, speed, and attitude. But it came at a deadly cost. These cars were brutally fast, heavy, and had almost no safety features to protect drivers. No airbags, no traction control, just big engines and skinny tires. Behind the wheel, they became unforgiving machines that claimed thousands of lives on American roads. Get ready for the 12 American muscle cars that took over 4,000 lives, legends of speed with a dark history. Stick around till the end, and don't forget to subscribe. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda has long stood as one of the most legendary names in American muscle car history, and for good reason. It was the perfect storm of raw power, aggressive design, and cultural timing. The Barracuda had been around since 1964, but by 1970, Plymouth gave it a new E-body platform shared with the Dodge Challenger, finally creating a car that could rival the Mustang and Camaro in looks and presence. But where the Cuda really set itself apart was under the hood. The 426 Hemi engine, famously nicknamed the Elephant for its massive size and bulk, was a factory-installed weapon that redefined what street performance could be. Officially rated at 425 horsepower, everyone knew Chrysler's numbers were deliberately understated to keep insurance companies and regulators at bay. In reality, most properly tuned Hemi Cudas were putting out closer to 470 to 500 horsepower, a number that in 1970 was simply insane for something you could drive off the showroom floor. Yet the very thing that made the car legendary also made it dangerous. The Hemi produced incredible straight-line speed, but was notoriously difficult to control. With so much weight in the nose thanks to the giant iron block V8, the Cuda suffered from heavy understeer in corners and, more critically, terrible traction off the line on street tires of the day. On paper, a Hemi Cuda could hit 0 to 60 in about 5.5 seconds and cover the quarter mile in the low 13s or even high 12s in ideal conditions. But on real-world streets with bias-ply tires, most owners found themselves burning rubber through first and second gear, struggling to keep the car pointed straight. This unpredictability made the Cuda both exhilarating and terrifying to drive. Insurance companies quickly caught on to the Hemi Cuda's reputation. With accident reports piling up and repair costs sky high, the car was branded a high-risk vehicle by insurers, sending premiums into the stratosphere. Many young buyers who scraped together the money for the car quickly found they couldn't afford to keep it on the road legally. As a result, many Hemi Cudas ended up being weekend drag strip machines rather than daily drivers, or worse, totaled within their first few years when their owners underestimated the raw force lurking beneath the hood. Culturally, the 1970 Hemi Cuda became an icon almost instantly. Its wide stance, shaker hood, bold high-impact color options like Plum Crazy and Vitamin C Orange, and pistol grip 4-speed shifter made it one of the most recognizable muscle cars of all time. But it was also feared. Police departments knew that young men with Hemi Cudas were likely to push them beyond safe limits, and stories of wrecked cars wrapped around telephone poles became part of its lore. Owners from the era often recall the car as both the best and worst vehicle they ever owned. One said, "It was like driving a stick of dynamite. You never knew when it was going to blow up in your hands." Another remembered street racing his Hemi Cuda against smaller block Chevelles and GTOs, saying, "Once it hooked, nothing could touch it. But most of the time, you were just spinning, praying you didn't hit the curb." The combination of rarity, danger, and raw power is what makes the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda so coveted today. Only a few hundred were ever built with the Hemi engine, in coupe or convertible form, making survivors incredibly valuable. In fact, original Hemi Cuda convertibles have become some of the most expensive American muscle cars ever sold at auction, with prices climbing into the multi-million-dollar range. Collectors prize them not just for their scarcity, but for what they represent. The absolute peak of the muscle car era, before emissions regulations, insurance crackdowns, and the oil crisis began choking off Detroit's horsepower wars. The Hemi Cuda was not a car for the faint of heart, and in many ways it embodied both the brilliance and the recklessness of the era. It was fast enough to destroy almost anything else on the road, but unforgiving enough to punish anyone who didn't respect it. It was a machine that demanded skill, restraint, and nerves of steel, yet was marketed to a generation of thrill-seeking young drivers who often lacked all three. That's why so many ended up in junkyards, and why the ones that survived have become priceless artifacts of a bygone time when Detroit let its engineers build cars with absolutely no concern for safety or sanity. Would you like me to also go deeper into how the Hemi Cuda compared to its Mopar siblings of 1970, like the Dodge Challenger RT Hemi and the Roadrunner 440 six-pack, to show why it has remained the most famous of them all?
The 1969 Dodge Charger RT 440 Magnum occupies a strange and fascinating place in muscle car history. A car adored for its looks, feared for its performance, and immortalized by popular culture, yet notorious in its own era as a dangerous machine for the wrong driver. By 1969, Dodge was riding high on the success of the second-generation Charger, a car that was born to be a style icon. Its bodywork, with its swooping Coke bottle curves, recessed grille with hideaway headlights, and wide, imposing stance, was unlike anything else on American roads. Dodge wanted the Charger to be as much about presence as performance, and when the RT Road Track package was ordered with the 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, it delivered a combination of raw power and visual aggression that few other muscle cars could match. The 440 Magnum engine itself was one of Chrysler's great masterpieces. Displacing 7.2 liters, it was rated at 375 horsepower and a staggering 480 pounds-feet of torque, though most enthusiasts agree those numbers were conservative. In real-world testing, the Charger RT 440 could pull off 0 to 60 miles per hour runs in the mid-6-second range, with quarter-mile times in the high 13s when driven well. This was territory that rivaled or even beat some Corvettes and European sports cars of the time, but in a car that could seat 5 and haul luggage in a massive trunk. The 440 Magnum was, in many ways, the ideal big block muscle car engine. Less temperamental than the 426 Hemi, far cheaper to buy, easier to live with, and more forgiving in traffic, yet still capable of punishing acceleration when you buried the throttle. But that was also where the danger began. The Charger, for all its beauty and muscle, was a massive, heavy car. At nearly 18 feet long and tipping the scales at close to 4,000 pounds, it was simply too big and too heavy for the suspension and tire technology of the late 1960s. Dodge engineers had designed it for straight-line muscle, not nimble handling. The steering was vague, body roll was pronounced, and the nose-heavy weight distribution made it prone to understeer in fast corners. More than one tester of the time commented that the car felt like a locomotive in the turns, unstoppable and unwilling to change direction once it built momentum. Even more problematic were the brakes. Many RT 440s left the factory with front drum brakes, and while discs were available, not all buyers opted for them. Bringing nearly 2 tons of Mopar muscle to a stop from highway speeds with drums that faded under repeated use was, in hindsight, an almost reckless proposition. When combined with the instant wall of torque from the big block, the Charger became a car that could get into trouble faster than it could get out of it. Law enforcement of the time knew exactly what these cars were capable of, and they kept a close eye on young drivers who managed to get behind the wheel of one. Accident reports from the early 1970s frequently mentioned Chargers being involved in high-speed crashes, often described as losing control in curves or skidding off the road. Some police officers of the era referred to the Charger, particularly the RT 440, as a coffin on wheels, not because the car wasn't structurally strong, but because its performance was simply too much for the average driver to handle safely. Insurance companies caught on quickly, and like with the Hemi cars, premiums for the 440 Magnum Chargers skyrocketed, which only added to their mystique as dangerous, forbidden machines. And yet, paradoxically, this danger also helped fuel the car's legend. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the 69 Charger had become a television star, thanks to the Dukes of Hazzard, where the General Lee leapt across rivers, ditches, and barns with impossible grace. For a generation of viewers, the Charger wasn't just a car. It was the ultimate symbol of rebellious freedom and indestructible American horsepower. Of course, the real cars weren't as invincible as their TV counterpart, and hundreds of Chargers were sacrificed during filming, but the show cemented the Charger as an icon. Owners from the original era still remember the split personality of the 440 Magnum Charger. Some loved it as the ultimate street bruiser. One recalled, "The 440 felt like it was trying to twist the car in half when you floored it. Nothing could touch it in a straight line." Another, less fondly, said, "It was terrifying. You'd hit 90 without realizing it, and the steering felt like stirring soup. Brakes? Forget it." These mixed experiences gave the Charger RT440 a reputation as both a dream car and a windowmaker. When compared to its sibling, the legendary 426 Hemi, the 440 Magnum often came out as the more practical choice. The Hemi may have ruled drag strips and carried more prestige, but it was expensive, finicky, and overkill for most street driving. The 440, on the other hand, was cheaper, easier to maintain, and delivered nearly the same straight-line thrills. For many buyers, the 440 Magnum was the real-world muscle car engine, making it far more common than the Hemi, though today both are prized. Ironically, while the Hemi became the legend, it was the 440 Magnum Charger that more often found itself in the hands of average drivers and, sadly, wrapped around telephone poles, bridge abutments, or guardrails. Today, the 1969 Dodge Charger RT440 Magnum is one of the crown jewels of Mopar collecting. Restored examples command six-figure prices, and they are beloved for their design, their cultural footprint, and the sheer nostalgia they evoke. But beneath all the admiration is the memory of just how unforgiving they could be. They were cars that demanded respect and punished overconfidence swiftly. That is the dual legacy of the Charger RT440 Magnum, a car that was as much a dream as it was a nightmare, a machine that blended beauty and brute force into something unforgettable. It was both the perfect muscle car and one of the most dangerous, and that contradiction is exactly why it will never be forgotten. Would you like me to make the next entry just as long and dramatic for another dangerous Mopar of the same era, like the 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner 440 six-pack, which also earned a reputation for killing inexperienced drivers?
The 1971 Ford Mustang Mach 1 429 Super Cobra Jet is one of those cars that truly represents both the peak and the danger of Detroit's horsepower wars. By 1971, the Mustang had transformed dramatically from the nimble pony car of the mid-1960s into something much larger, heavier, and more imposing. The government's looming safety and emissions regulations were beginning to cast their shadow, but Ford's performance division wanted one last gasp of unfiltered brutality. Their answer was to stuff the massive 429 cubic inch Cobra Jet engine in its most savage Super Cobra Jet form into the redesigned Mach 1. The result was a car that was devastatingly quick in a straight line, but also unforgiving, unpredictable, and ultimately dangerous in the hands of young and inexperienced drivers. The heart of the Mach 1 SCJ was Ford's 429 cubic inch big block, an engine built less for civility and more for dominance. Rated at 375 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque, those numbers were famously underrated to appease insurance companies. In reality, with proper tuning, the 429 SCJ could easily deliver well over 400 horsepower. It featured 4-bolt mains, forged pistons, and a beefed-up bottom end designed to withstand punishing abuse on drag strips. To complement the engine, SCJ cars came with mandatory 3.91 or 4.11 rear gears, heavy-duty cooling systems, and either a close-ratio 4-speed manual or a rugged C6 automatic. This was a package built to run hard and fast, not to dawdle down boulevards. On paper, it was one of the most fearsome street Mustangs Ford ever built. In real-world testing, a well-driven SCJ Mach 1 could sprint to 60 miles per hour in about 5.5 to 6 seconds, with quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range, territory that placed it among the quickest American cars of the era. It was essentially a factory drag car with license plates, and its sheer brute force put it in a class with Mopar Hemis and Chevy LS6s. For muscle car enthusiasts, this was heaven. For insurance companies and safety officials, it was a nightmare. The problem was that by 1971, the Mustang had outgrown the sharp, agile proportions that made the original cars such a joy to drive. The body was longer, lower, and significantly heavier, tipping the scales at nearly 3,900 pounds. With that weight came a nose-heavy balance when the massive 429 was dropped into the engine bay. The car wanted to plow straight ahead in corners, punishing any driver who tried to push it too hard. Combine that understeer with the primitive suspension technology of the day, narrow bias-ply tires that struggled to put power down, and weak brakes that faded after a few hard stops, and you had a car that could easily overwhelm its driver. Wheel spin was another constant companion. With the SCJ's deep rear gears and explosive torque, simply pressing the throttle too aggressively could send the rear tires into a smoke show. In a straight line, on a drag strip, that was part of the fun. But on public roads, especially wet ones, it spelled disaster. Countless period accident reports detailed Mach 1s sliding out of control, fishtailing into oncoming traffic, or spinning completely off the road. The sheer unpredictability of the power delivery made it a car that demanded immense skill, something few 18 to 25-year-olds, the primary buyers of muscle cars, had in abundance. Law enforcement officers of the early 1970s began to recognize these cars quickly. Just as the Hemi Cuda and Charger 440s had earned reputations as killer cars, the 429 SCJ Mustang Mach 1 also developed a grim reputation. Police blotters of the time often contained reports of fatal high-speed wrecks involving these cars. One Ohio State patrolman later recalled, "Every time we got called to a bad crash with a Mustang in 71 or 72, 9 times out of 10, it was one of those big block SCJs. They were just too much car for the average kid." Insurance companies agreed, slapping astronomical premiums on SCJ-equipped cars, effectively choking off sales. For enthusiasts who owned them and survived, the memories remain a mix of awe and fear. Some described it as the last real Mustang, the final, unfiltered blast of big block madness before emissions regulations and the fuel crisis brought horsepower crashing down. One owner remembered, "The car felt like it wanted to rip itself apart. First gear was useless, you'd just light the tires. But nothing pulled like that car on the highway." Another, less fondly, admitted it was terrifying. You'd be fine 1 second and then sideways the next with no warning. The power came in like a sledgehammer. Compared to the small block Mach 1s or even the Boss 351 of the same year, the 429 SCJ was less of a balanced sports machine and more of a blunt force weapon. It wasn't designed to carve corners, it was designed to obliterate quarter miles. Unfortunately, the streets where most of them ended up were ill-suited to that purpose, and with their unforgiving handling characteristics, many of these cars didn't survive the 1970s intact. Between accidents, high insurance costs, and the muscle car market collapse after 1973, the 429 SCJ Mach 1 became one of the rarest and most notorious Mustangs ever built.
Today, collectors prize them for their rarity and performance. A genuine SCJ Mustang Mach-1 is a six-figure car at auction, valued as much for its mythos as its metal. They are respected now as raw, dangerous artifacts of a time when Detroit still pushed boundaries with reckless abandon. But beneath the admiration lies the truth. These cars took lives. They were, for all their beauty and power, lethal machines in the wrong hands. The 1971 Ford Mustang Mach-1 429 Super Cobra Jet will always be remembered as one of Ford's boldest creations, but also one of its most dangerous. It was the kind of car that defined the excess of the muscle car era, a rolling contradiction of engineering brilliance and terrifying impracticality. It was both dream and nightmare. And that is exactly why it continues to captivate muscle car fans more than 50 years later. Do you want me to give the next one in the same long, dramatic style for another deadly early 70s muscle car, like the 1970 Buick GS Stage 1 455, which also earned a reputation for overwhelming inexperienced drivers with torque? The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro Z28, perhaps the most celebrated Trans Am-inspired muscle machine of its time, was also one of the most treacherous cars for young drivers to own. While the SS396 and COPO Camaros stole headlines with their brute horsepower, the Z28 was an entirely different beast. It wasn't built to be a drag strip king or a boulevard cruiser. It was engineered to compete in the Sports Car Club of America's Trans Am series, where rules capped engine displacement at 305 cubic inches. Chevrolet's solution was the now legendary 302 V8, a small block built for revs, precision, and competition, rather than easygoing drivability. That made the Z28 an astonishing performer in the right hands, but in the wrong ones, it became one of the deadliest cars on the streets of late 1960s America. The 302 cubic inch engine was essentially a racing motor disguised as a street engine. With a forged steel crankshaft, heavy-duty connecting rods, solid lifter camshaft, and high-flow heads, it was designed to live above 6,000 RPM, a figure unheard of in the big block world. Officially rated at 290 horsepower, the engine in reality delivered closer to 350-360 when properly tuned. But here's the catch. All that power lived at the top of the rev range. Below 3,500 RPM, the car felt sluggish compared to a 396 Chevelle or a 440 Roadrunner. That meant the only way to get the most out of a Z28 was to drive it hard, very hard. You had to wring its neck, rev it to 7,000 RPM, and slam through the close ratio Muncie 4-speed if you wanted to experience what it could really do. On a racetrack, that was a joy. On public streets, it was a recipe for disaster. Period testers praised its razor-sharp handling, especially when equipped with a F41 suspension package and wide Goodyear polyglass tires, but they also noted its twitchiness at the limit. The car demanded constant attention. There was no smooth swell of torque like in a big block. Instead, it egged drivers into reckless high-rev antics. Young owners, many barely out of high school, treated them like their own Trans Am racers. It wasn't unusual to hear stories of drivers launching their Z28s at 6,500 RPM in first gear and hanging the tack needle on the red line just to keep up with traffic, behavior that pushed both engine and driver into dangerous territory. Law enforcement officers in the late 1960s quickly caught on. Many police reports and insurance studies of the time noted that Camaro Z28s were disproportionately represented in serious accidents involving young drivers. Part of the issue was the perception. The car looked relatively tame compared to big block SS models, so parents might have thought they were safer choices for teenagers. In reality, they were handing their kids a high-strung race car. Police blotters from California to Ohio told the same story. Over-revved Z28s found mangled around telephone poles, wrecked in canyon runs, or flipped on rural highways. The problem wasn't only power, but the driving style the car demanded. The Z28 rewarded aggression, and punished hesitation. It was a machine that begged to be thrashed, but unlike a forgiving big block that could carry you along on a wave of torque, the 302 required skill and precision. A missed shift at 7,000 RPM could grenade the motor. An inexperienced driver lifting mid-corner could unsettle the rear end and send the car into a spin. Insurance companies, already on the warpath against muscle cars by 1969, flagged the Z28 as a high-risk model and charged astronomical premiums for it, sometimes even higher than for the SS396. Yet for all its dangers, the Z28 left behind a legacy of brilliance. On the racetrack, it dominated Trans Am competition, especially under the legendary Penske-Donahue team. On the street, it became a cult car, respected for its purity and focus. Enthusiasts today often call it one of the greatest driver's cars of the muscle car era. Owners who survived their Z28 days describe them with reverence and a touch of fear. One recalled, "It was like driving a time bomb. You had to stay on top of it every second or it would bite you." Another said, "The car made me a better driver, because if you weren't, it would kill you." The 1969 Z28 stands as a fascinating contradiction, one of the most beautifully engineered performance cars of its time, yet also one of the most lethal in unskilled hands. It wasn't built to be safe, comfortable, or forgiving. It was built to win races, and anyone who drove it on the street was stepping into a car that constantly pushed them to go faster, rev higher, and take more risks. Many did, and too many never came back. Would you like me to continue this series with another dangerous, small car, big engine combination, like the 1966 Chevy Nova SS327 or 396, which became infamous for their deadly handling quirks?
The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 LS6 wasn't just another muscle car. It was the king of the hill, the high watermark of Detroit's horsepower wars, and in many ways, the car that defined both the glory and the danger of the golden muscle era. On paper, it was a simple formula. Take Chevy's midsize A-body platform, stuff the largest and most brutally powerful big block ever offered in a production car under the hood, and let the torque do the talking. What emerged was the LS6, a 454 cubic inch monster conservatively rated at 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, figures that even today command respect. In its day, it was the most powerful muscle car you could buy right off the showroom floor. A car so extreme that insurance companies shuddered, cops took notice, and young drivers who weren't prepared for its ferocity often ended up in the morgue. The LS6 wasn't a mild street performer. This was an engine built with drag racing in mind. It featured forged aluminum pistons, a high-lift solid lifter camshaft, a massive Holley 800 CFM carburetor atop an aluminum intake, and a compression ratio of 11:25:1, which demanded high-octane fuel that was becoming harder to find by 1970. Chevy paired it with either the legendary Muncie Rock Crusher 4-speed manual or the durable Turbo 400 automatic. When magazines tested it, the car consistently ran the quarter mile in the low 13-second range at over 105 miles per hour on skinny bias ply tires. And with better traction, many owners coaxed it into the 12s. For a factory stock car in 1970, that was astonishing. But here's the dark side. The Chevelle SS454 LS6 may have been fast, but it was also dangerous in the wrong hands. It weighed nearly 4,000 pounds, and with all that mass combined with 1970s suspension geometry, small drum brakes in the rear, and tires that were nowhere near modern performance rubber, it was not a car you could simply point and shoot. Stopping distances were alarmingly long, brake fade set in quickly under repeated hard use, and the chassis could feel unpredictable if pushed too hard through corners. The engine produced so much torque that stabbing the throttle at the wrong time could instantly send the rear end sideways. To make matters worse, young street racers treated the car as a weapon, lining up at stoplights, drag strips, and rural roads for Saturday night grudge matches. More than a few ended in wrecked Chevelles, wrecked bodies, and grim police reports.
Period law enforcement bulletins actually singled out big block Chevelles, particularly LS6 cars, as high-risk vehicles. Insurance companies charged some of the highest premiums in the industry for SS454 owners, sometimes refusing coverage altogether for young men under 25. Despite these barriers, the car became a symbol of rebellion, a machine that seemed to dare you to test your limits. Many owners recall how unforgiving it was. One said, "The LS6 didn't give you a second chance. If you made a mistake, you'd either blow the engine sky high or end up in a ditch." Another remembered seeing multiple friends total their cars in just the first year of ownership. The car's reputation for danger wasn't only about raw speed, it was also about how deceptive it was. With its wide stance, aggressive stripes, and bulging cowl induction hood, it looked every bit the part of a muscle monster. But its smooth Chevrolet manners at idle lulled some drivers into thinking they were in a tame car. The LS6 only revealed its violence when the throttle was floored. Then it launched like a cannonball, surging forward with a brutality that could overwhelm inexperienced drivers in seconds. Today, the LS6 Chevelle is celebrated as a legend, one of the pinnacle achievements of the muscle car era. Collectors pay astronomical prices for surviving examples, and enthusiasts revere it as the ultimate Chevelle. But in its time, it was also one of the most lethal cars on the road, a car that asked too much of too many young drivers who lacked the skill to tame it. It embodied the intoxicating mix of speed and danger that made the muscle car era unforgettable, but also contributed to its downfall, as rising insurance rates, government scrutiny, and public outcry over deadly accidents brought the horsepower wars to a close. Would you like me to follow this one with another deadly heavyweight from 1970, the Buick GSX Stage 1 455, which was just as ferocious as the LS6, but even more of a sleeper, catching drivers off guard?
The 1968 Pontiac GTO 400 Ram Air was one of those cars that defined not only an era, but also a culture. By 1968, the GTO had already earned its reputation as the car that sparked the muscle car movement back in 1964, but Pontiac wasn't about to rest on its laurels. With the introduction of the Ram Air package on its already potent 400 cubic inch V8, the GTO became far more than a stylish boulevard cruiser. It was a genuine street predator. Its official rating of 360 horsepower was conservative. Enthusiasts and tuners of the day swore that real-world figures were closer to 400, if not higher, and the car's brutally strong mid-range torque made it an instant favorite among young men who lived for Saturday night stoplight drag races. What set the Ram Air GTO apart wasn't just the numbers on paper, but the character of its power delivery. The functional hood scoops fed cold air directly into the carburetor, sharpening throttle response and giving the car an almost animalistic surge when you opened it up. In stock trim, it was capable of running the quarter mile in the low 14-second range. And with a few bolt-ons or slicks, many drivers pushed them into the 13s, territory that rivaled Corvettes and Mopars with larger engines. On the street, that meant the GTO 400 Ram Air had the ability to make a fool out of almost anyone who tried to challenge it. One owner summed it up perfectly years later: "The judge didn't forgive mistakes. If you underestimated it or overestimated yourself, you were finished." But with that raw performance came consequences. The 1968 GTO was still a large, heavy car, with brakes and suspension systems that were nowhere near up to the task of managing its power. It wasn't uncommon for young drivers to find themselves in over their heads after a few seconds of wheel spin and fishtailing, especially since Pontiac marketed the GTO directly to thrill seekers in their late teens and early 20s. The car had a reputation for being unforgiving if pushed beyond its limits. Police reports from the late 1960s frequently mentioned GTOs being involved in high-speed accidents, often with tragic outcomes. Insurance companies caught on quickly. In fact, many adjusters cynically joked that GTO stood for Gas Tires Oblivion, a nod to how quickly these cars devoured rubber, fuel, and sometimes even their drivers.
On the street, the GTO 400 Ram Air became the king of informal drag races. Teenagers and young adults lined up on empty stretches of road just to see if they could beat the Judge, as the high-performance GTO variant became known in 1969. Even before that moniker was officially introduced, though, the Ram Air cars carried the same intimidating aura. It was loud, brash, unapologetically American, and it became a symbol of rebellion for a generation. But with speed limits ignored, traction limited, and alcohol often involved, the combination was deadly. Stories abound from owners who lost friends in GTO crashes, and old-timers who remember the car often speak of it with a mix of nostalgia and sadness. Yet, despite its reputation for danger, the 1968 Pontiac GTO 400 Ram Air was also one of the most charismatic muscle cars of its time. Its styling set trends. The split grille, hidden headlights, and Coke bottle body lines gave it a presence few could match. Its engine made sounds that enthusiasts still chase today, and its sheer performance made it both a hero and a villain, the kind of car you couldn't forget even if you wanted to. In many ways, the Ram Air GTO embodied the dual nature of the muscle car era: thrilling, seductive, but also reckless and sometimes lethal. Today, collectors prize these cars as icons. But back then, they were dangerous weapons in the hands of kids who often had more confidence than driving skill. It was the kind of car that made legends at stoplights, but also filled graveyards. The GTO had started the party in 1964, but by 1968, with the Ram Air engine snarling through those hood scoops, it had become the life of the party and the most dangerous guest. Would you like me to follow this with another Pontiac that gained a similarly deadly reputation, the 1970 Firebird Trans Am Ram Air 4, which was smaller, lighter, and even more unpredictable?
The 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30 wasn't just a muscle car, it was a full-blown paradox, a machine that married the refinement of Oldsmobile's luxury ethos with the raw, unrelenting power of Detroit's most extreme street rockets. In an era when muscle cars were defined by their audacity, the W30 stood out because it dared to combine almost contradictory traits. It offered plush interiors, chrome accents, and smooth ride quality, while hiding an engine that could vaporize tires, snap axles, and terrify anyone naive enough to step on the throttle without respect. The W30's 400 cubic inch rocket V8, upgraded with the W30 Performance Package, transformed a seemingly conventional coupe into one of the most formidable street machines of 1970. With its high lift cam, aggressive valve timing, dual exhausts, and a freer-flowing intake manifold topped by a massive Holley 4-barrel carb, it delivered a staggering 495 pound-feet of torque and a conservative 370 horsepower rating, enough to hurl the 3,600-pound car into the quarter-mile low 13s, even on the skinny bias-ply tires of the day. Those who experienced it knew that the W30 was not a car for timid souls. The danger of the W30 wasn't hidden. It was embedded in its very DNA. Its torque was brutal and immediate, and because it sat atop a heavy platform with rear drum brakes, controlling it at speed required skill, precision, and nerves of steel. A hard launch from a stoplight could result in instantaneous wheel spin, torque steer, and the back end stepping out violently. Its suspension, while adequate for normal cruising, was far from modern sports car sharpness, meaning cornering at high speed demanded respect. On long stretches of open road or deserted highway, the W30 could become a rolling rocket ship with the subtlety of a freight train. One period reviewer remarked that driving it was like having a fighter jet strapped to your living room floor. The power is intoxicating, but one misstep and disaster follows. The W30's lethal reputation wasn't just theoretical, it was documented in real-world incidents. Insurance companies quickly recognized it as a high-risk model, and premiums for young male drivers skyrocketed. Police blotters from the early 1970s are filled with reports of W30s involved in high-speed accidents,
rollovers, and fiery crashes. Drivers often underestimated the car's capabilities, lulled into a false sense of security by its smooth, almost luxurious demeanor at low speeds. Many accidents occurred on suburban roads or short stretches of highway where overconfidence combined with the W30's unrelenting torque proved fatal. One owner from Detroit recalled that we used to line up at the stoplights and guys who thought they could outrun us barely made it past first gear before the rear tires were screaming. It was exhilarating, but terrifying. A car you respected, or it would hurt you. Even as it terrorized streets, the W30 earned adoration from enthusiasts who understood its genius. Unlike many other muscle cars of the era, it was engineered for both brute acceleration and a degree of composure. You could cruise it on the boulevard with surprising comfort. Yet the moment you opened the throttle, it transformed into a monster capable of dragging you into another dimension of speed. The duality of the car, civilized yet savage, elegant yet dangerous, created a near mythical reputation that persists today. Its rarity, combined with the sheer thrill and danger it delivered, has made the W30 a highly sought-after collector's item, and surviving examples command enormous sums, especially when fully documented with their original W30 option codes intact. What truly sets the W30 apart in muscle car history, however, is the visceral experience it offered. Unlike big block Chevelles or Hemis, which sometimes felt like brute force missiles, the W30 demanded respect. Its torque delivery was almost surgical in the right hands, precise, violent, yet controllable if you had experience. Push it recklessly and it would punish you instantly, fishtailing, snapping the rear, or breaking traction in a terrifying display of raw physics. The car earned nicknames among street racers and enthusiasts: the gentleman's dragster for its refinement, but the brick rocket for its tendency to behave like a loaded cannon on wheels. Owners and journalists alike noted that the W30 was one of the first muscle cars where driver skill directly determined survival. By today's standards, the 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30 is a legend, a car celebrated for both its engineering brilliance and its raw, unfiltered power. But in its own era, it was borderline reckless, a vehicle that combined nearly 500 pound-feet of torque, rear drum brakes, and a heavy platform into a machine that demanded constant vigilance. Stories of destroyed cars, overturned chassis, and fiery wrecks were common enough that they became cautionary tales in the muscle car community. Yet those who mastered it were called an unmatched thrill, a combination of torque, acceleration, and luxury that few other cars of its time could match. The W30 wasn't just a muscle car, it was a statement, a warning, and for the lucky few who understood it, a symphony of speed that could exhilarate, terrify, and mesmerize all at once. If you like, I can continue the series with another contemporaneous killer torque legend, the 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 455, which was even more of a sleeper, offering insane performance in a deceptively understated package that often caught even seasoned drivers off guard. The 1966 Shelby GT350 was not merely a Mustang with fancy stripes or a performance badge. It was Carroll Shelby's audacious experiment, taking a mass-produced pony car and transforming it into a street-legal race machine. Every component, from the chassis to the suspension to the engine, screamed purpose and performance. Beneath its deceptively simple exterior lay a 289 cubic-inch Hypo V8 engine, tuned to produce 306 horsepower, coupled with a lightweight body that shaved nearly 300 pounds off a standard Mustang. This wasn't a car designed for comfort or casual cruising. It was built to dominate corners, sprint in a straight line, and give its driver a pure, unfiltered driving experience that few other American cars of the era could match. The driving dynamics of the GT350 were both exhilarating and punishing. Its suspension was calibrated for racing, stiff, precise, and unyielding, meaning that even minor bumps in the road translated directly into the cabin. The car's immediate throttle response, combined with the lightweight platform, created a sensation of explosive acceleration the moment you touched the gas. Steering was sharp and direct, but that precision came with zero forgiveness. Oversteer, sudden snaps, and wheel spin were constant companions for anyone inexperienced with a car that demanded anticipation and finesse. Enthusiasts who had mastered the GT350 described it as like holding lightning in your hands. But for novices, it could quickly become a nightmare. The danger of the 1966 Shelby GT350 was not theoretical. Reports from the era, often anecdotal but consistent, tell of young drivers who purchased the car thinking they were acquiring a stylish pony car with extra oomph, only to find themselves overwhelmed by its unpredictability. At stoplights, its torque could break rear tires loose instantly. On sweeping curves, it could step out violently if throttle control wasn't perfect. Highway speeds amplified the risk. The car's light weight combined with its ferocious engine meant that even a small overcorrection could send the GT350 into a spin, often with disastrous consequences. Many inexperienced drivers, intoxicated by the reputation and media hype surrounding the Shelby name, ignored the car's limitations and paid the ultimate price. Contemporary periodicals warned repeatedly that the GT350 was not a car for the uninitiated and required both skill and respect. Yet the allure of Shelby performance drew countless teenagers and young adults into its grip. Beyond raw performance, the GT350's character was a study in contrasts. It offered the image of a street car that could be driven daily, a Mustang coupe with racing heritage, but under the skin, it was a brutal, almost merciless machine. The brakes, although upgraded compared to a standard Mustang, were still rudimentary by modern standards, and they often faded under sustained aggressive driving. The tires, narrow by today's measure, could not always cope with the 306 horsepower, and suspension geometry, designed for track precision, punished even slight miscalculations on regular streets. Every red light drag, every twisty back road, every spontaneous burst of speed was a gamble. Those who mastered it spoke of the GT350 as a revelation, precise, agile, and ferociously fast. Those who underestimated it often found themselves in terrifying, sometimes fatal situations. Yet, for all its dangers, the 1966 Shelby GT350 cemented itself as a legend. Its combination of lightweight agility, race-bred suspension, and a high-revving V8 made it feel alive in a way that few other cars could emulate. It was a machine that rewarded skill, patience, and respect, creating a driving experience both addictive and humbling. Owners who learned its limits could extract performance far beyond what a conventional Mustang could offer. Novices, however, discovered its brutal lessons the hard way. In essence, the GT350 was a car that could make a hero of the prepared driver and a cautionary tale of the reckless. Today, the 1966 Shelby GT350 is revered as one of the purest expressions of American muscle car ingenuity. A lightweight, aggressive, and iconic machine that blurred the line between street car and race car. Its rarity, historical significance, and visceral performance ensure that it commands astronomical respect and prices among collectors. But beyond its value and status, the GT350 remains a stark reminder of the raw power and danger of early muscle cars. Carroll Shelby had achieved his goal. He created a car that was thrilling beyond imagination, beautiful to behold, and, for the inexperienced, potentially deadly. In every sense, the 1966 Shelby GT350 was not just a car. It was an experience, a legend, and a lesson in how exhilarating and unforgiving pure performance can truly be. If you want, I can continue the story with the 1967 Shelby GT500, which took the GT350's danger to another level with a massive 428 cubic inch big block, turning it into an even more terrifying street-legal monster.
The 1971 Dodge Challenger RT Hemi was the embodiment of Mopar muscle in its purest, most intoxicating form. From the moment it rolled off the assembly line, it was clear this wasn't a car for timid drivers or casual cruisers. Under the long, menacing hood sat the legendary 426 cubic inch Hemi V8, a monster rated conservatively at 425 horsepower, but capable of producing nearly 500 pound-feet of torque in real-world conditions. That meant the Challenger RT Hemi could demolish the quarter mile in the low 13s, launch from stoplights with the intensity of a dragster, and effortlessly embarrass nearly every other muscle car on the street. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement, raw, aggressive, and unapologetically lethal. However, the performance came at a cost. The Challenger's wheelbase, while longer than that of the Barracuda or Mustang, combined with its relatively soft suspension tuning for street comfort, made high-speed handling a dicey affair. Steering, though direct, lacked the precision to tame the immense torque, especially in emergency maneuvers. Even experienced drivers had to respect the car's temperamental nature. Push it too hard entering a corner, and the rear end would step out with frightening immediacy. Lift off the throttle mid-slide, and it could spin unpredictably. On slick or uneven surfaces, the Hemi's ferocious output often overwhelmed the tires, making controlled acceleration a skill few novices possessed. Accident data from the early 1970s confirms what many enthusiasts suspected. The Challenger RT Hemi was disproportionately involved in crashes among younger male drivers. Its combination of blinding acceleration, heavy rear torque, and the era's rudimentary safety features, drum brakes in many configurations, limited seatbelt use, no airbags, made it unforgiving in the wrong hands. Period newspapers frequently described accidents involving Hemi-equipped Challengers as catastrophic, with spins, rollovers, and multi-car collisions being common outcomes when the car's prodigious power was mishandled. Mopar enthusiasts often joked grimly that a Hemi Challenger wasn't a car, it was a weapon. And in the hands of the uninitiated, the joke was all too literal. Yet the Challenger's legend only grew from this duality. Those who mastered the Hemi's nuances found themselves in command of a machine that could humiliate any other muscle car on a straightaway, while delivering the kind of tactile feedback that few contemporaries could match. Its suspension, though forgiving at low speeds, allowed for controlled drifts when properly managed. Its throttle, once learned, could be modulated with precision to wring out every ounce of acceleration without succumbing to uncontrollable wheel spin. Enthusiasts still recount moments of jaw-dropping performance, blasting past rival muscle cars at traffic lights, feeling the chassis squat under the torque, the tires screaming, the engine roaring, and the adrenaline surging, all while wrapped in the classic styling of a long-hood, short-deck pony coupe that could be mistaken for a mere street car at first glance. The 1971 Dodge Challenger RT Hemi is remembered today as one of the ultimate muscle car experiences, a machine that was thrilling, intoxicating, and, for the unprepared, terrifyingly dangerous. Its combination of the Hemi V8's explosive torque, heavy yet agile chassis, and unpredictable handling ensured that it was a car to be respected, feared, and above all, mastered. Collectors revere it not just for its speed, but for the sense of danger and raw performance it delivered, a reminder of an era when muscle cars were less about safety and more about pure, unfiltered power. In every sense, the Challenger RT Hemi wasn't a car to drive, it was a car to survive. If you want, I can create an even longer, fully immersive version detailing the Hemi Challenger's handling, street reputation, and period anecdotes, showing why it was both loved and feared in equal measure. The 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray 427 was the apex of American performance engineering in its era, a car that married striking design with unrelenting power, yet carried with it a reputation for sheer danger. On the surface, it was the embodiment of mid-60s sports car perfection. Sleek lines, a sharply sculpted fiberglass body, a low-slung profile, and a cockpit that promised both style and speed. But beneath that sculpted exterior lay the heart of a true performance monster, the 427 cubic inch big block V8.
Rated at 390 to 435 horsepower, depending on configuration, the engine produced torque so massive that it could easily overwhelm the rear tires and send the car into instantaneous oversteer. Unlike modern performance vehicles with electronic safety nets, the 1967 Corvette demanded respect and skill. Without it, tragedy was never far away. Driving a 427 Corvette was a test of nerve. The lightweight fiberglass body gave the car blistering acceleration, with 0 to 60 miles per hour times dipping into the low 5-second range, incredible for the period. But this performance came at a cost. The rear-wheel drive chassis, combined with massive torque, could snap loose at the slightest provocation. A quick launch from a stoplight, a tight corner taken too aggressively, or even a sudden bump on the road could spin the car violently. Steering was precise but unforgiving. Brakes were modest by modern standards, and the suspension, designed for a mix of road comfort and handling, offered little forgiveness. Drivers had to anticipate the car's every movement. Hesitation or overconfidence could lead to catastrophic loss of control. The Corvette's fiberglass body, while a revolutionary weight-saving technology, contributed to its deadly reputation. Unlike steel, fiberglass splintered violently in crashes, sending shards across the cabin and often making minor collisions fatal. Crash reports and insurance assessments from the late 1960s frequently referenced Corvettes in hospital accounts, dubbing the 427 the plastic coffin for its propensity to offer little protection in high-speed accidents. Combined with the car's acceleration and snap oversteer characteristics, it was a vehicle that rewarded mastery and punished errors with extraordinary severity. Young drivers, seduced by the Corvette's image as America's ultimate sports car, were disproportionately represented in accidents, a sobering reality that contrasted sharply with the car's glamorous appeal in magazines and advertisements. Despite the danger, the Corvette 427's mystique only grew. Experienced drivers learned to harness the engine's power, modulate throttle inputs, and respect its limits, discovering a vehicle capable of sublime performance and pure driving joy. With careful handling, the 427 could be a rocket on the drag strip, a nimble performer on winding roads, and an unmistakable symbol of American automotive ambition. Its combination of raw power, exotic aesthetics, and engineering daring made it an icon. Yet the very features that gave it such allure also cemented its reputation as one of the deadliest high-performance cars of the 1960s. Owners and collectors today revere the 1967 Corvette Stingray 427 not only for its speed and rarity, but also for the edge-of-your-seat tension that defined its driving experience. It is remembered as a car that was as thrilling as it was perilous, a vehicle that could exhilarate, intimidate, and, if mishandled, destroy. The legend of the 427 Corvette endures because it embodied the golden age of American muscle and sports cars, a time when horsepower was king, restraint was optional, and skill could mean the difference between glory and catastrophe. In the annals of performance history, few cars have inspired such awe, fear, and respect all at once. If you want, I can continue with even more detailed account, including period owner anecdotes, street racing lore, and specific crash cases that underline why the 427 Corvette was both adored and feared in its era.
The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 occupies a singular place in muscle car history. A car that combined a luxury coupe's sophistication with raw, nearly untamable performance, creating a driving experience as intoxicating as it was treacherous. At first glance, it might have appeared to the casual observer as a slightly more upscaled GS or Grand Sport, adorned with subtle but confident GSX stripes, bold and daring color options like Saturn Yellow or Apollo White, and an interior finished with plush bucket seats, thick carpets, and wood grain accents. It exuded elegance, refinement, and a hint of understated aggression, the sort of car your parents might approve of if they didn't know what lurked under the hood. But lift the long hood and the illusion of tame sophistication evaporated. Inside that hood lay Buick's 455 cubic inch V8 in Stage 1 configuration, producing a massive 360 horsepower and a staggering 510 pound-feet of torque. The engine wasn't just strong, it was a force of nature. The torque delivery was immediate, brutal, and almost hypnotic. A gentle press of the accelerator could catapult the GSX Stage 1 forward like a rocket, while a slightly heavier foot could overwhelm the rear tires, sending the massive coupe into sudden oversteer. This wasn't a car to be casually toyed with. The sheer power-to-weight ratio, a long, heavy, top-heavy body carrying over 3,900 pounds of mass, made the vehicle both formidable and unpredictable. Drivers experienced a visceral thrill the moment the clutch was released or the throttle applied, but with that thrill came constant risk. One misjudgment, one overzealous entry into a corner, one panic lift of the throttle, and the GSX Stage 1 could transform from a controlled, civilized car into a spinning, unstoppable force. The suspension, tuned for a mix of comfort and performance, was another double-edged sword. On smooth streets, it delivered a surprisingly compliant ride for a muscle car, masking its true potential until provoked. Hit a curve hard or accelerate aggressively, and the car's long wheelbase and soft weight distribution could betray the driver, producing dramatic rear-end slides or sudden wheel spin. Steering, while responsive, lacked the precision to immediately correct such slides, making snap oversteer a real and terrifying possibility. Period reports and first-hand accounts from owners in 1970 repeatedly stressed that the GSX Stage 1 demanded respect and experience. A novice could be airborne into a ditch or collide with a tree before realizing the car had a mind of its own. Even the braking system, adequate by the era's standards but primitive by modern norms, was frequently cited as a weak link in emergency scenarios. Drum brakes on many models struggled to stop the car's significant mass under spirited driving conditions, especially when paired with sticky tires designed to handle the Stage 1's torque. Combined with high-speed launches and aggressive acceleration, the car's stopping distance could be longer than expected, leaving drivers scrambling to maintain control. Hospitals and police reports of the early 1970s contain numerous accounts of accidents involving young, inexperienced drivers who had bought into the allure of a luxury muscle car, only to discover its unforgiving nature in the cruelest way possible. Yet, for those who could master it, the 1970 GSX Stage 1 was an unparalleled expression of American engineering audacity. The car rewarded patience, precision, and understanding. A skilled hand could harness the immense torque to rip down drag strips in the low 13-second range, launch from stoplights with authority, and navigate winding back roads with a controlled, yet exhilarating slide. Owners who truly understood the Stage 1 often described it as a gentleman's missile, simultaneously elegant, sophisticated, and brutally fast. Period road tests lauded its ability to combine comfort and performance, noting that few muscle cars could offer both the refinement to be driven daily and the raw power to dominate every street, quarter-mile, or highway encounter. The Buick GSX Stage 1's legend is inseparable from the duality it embodied: beauty and menace, luxury and brutality, exhilaration and danger. It was a car that could thrill, terrify, and humble in equal measure. Its rarity today and status among collectors is well-earned, not just because of its performance numbers or historical significance, but because of the skill, respect, and bravery it demanded from anyone brave enough to take the wheel. In the annals of American muscle, few cars have inspired such awe and fear simultaneously. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 remains a testament to a time when horsepower was king, engineering audacity reigned supreme, and driving without modern safety aids meant living dangerously every mile you pushed it. If you want, I can continue by weaving in specific period anecdotes, street racing legends, and personal stories from original Stage 1 owners, showing just how thrilling and terrifying it was to live with this luxury missile in the wild streets and drag strips of the early 1970s.
The 1969 Mercury Cougar Eliminator Boss 302 is one of the most fascinating and overlooked entries in the muscle car pantheon. While most enthusiasts focus on the Mustang Boss 302, the Cougar Eliminator took the same high-revving 302 cubic inch engine and stuffed it into a longer, heavier, and far more substantial body. At first glance, it looked like a suave, personal luxury coupe with its signature hidden headlights, Coke bottle profile, and aggressive rear spoiler. A car designed to turn heads at the drive-in or cruise the boulevard. But under the hood, it was a different story entirely. A high-strung, track-bred engine with racing pedigree capable of pushing the Cougar far beyond what its size suggested. Performance was intoxicating, but treacherous. The 302 Boss engine produced roughly 290 horsepower in factory trim, but the Cougar's additional weight, heavier than a Mustang by several hundred pounds, meant that all of that power was applied through a chassis not originally designed for such intensity. The car could accelerate brutally in a straight line, but once you tried to translate that power into corners, the rear end could step out with alarming suddenness. Enthusiasts who chased the Cougar Eliminator on public roads quickly learned that the combination of torque, weight, and narrow tires demanded respect and skill. Push it too hard, and the car would snap into oversteer, spinning unpredictably, a trait that made it both thrilling and extremely hazardous in the hands of inexperienced drivers. The car's handling quirks were compounded by its long wheelbase and soft personal luxury suspension setup. Unlike the Mustang Boss 302, which was more compact and nimble, the Cougar could easily become unsettled on rough surfaces during sudden maneuvers or under heavy acceleration in a corner. Even skilled drivers had to modulate throttle inputs carefully. One false move could send the car into a tail-happy slide or a dangerous spin. Its brakes, adequate for normal street driving, could struggle to control the Cougar's momentum when entering high-speed corners after a drag strip launch. Period road tests repeatedly warned that the Eliminator was not a forgiving car. It rewarded precision and punished overconfidence mercilessly. Despite the dangers, the Cougar Eliminator Boss 302 developed a dedicated following. Those who could master its temperament discovered a machine with unique dual personalities. It could cruise comfortably with the grace of a Mercury personal luxury coupe, offering a refined interior, plush seating, and style that was unmistakably Mercury. Yet in a straight line or on a track, it could embarrass lighter, smaller muscle cars, demonstrating that the Boss 302 engine had plenty of bite even in a heavier shell. Factory options like the handling package, limited slip differential, and heavy-duty suspension could temper some of its wild tendencies, but even fully equipped, the Cougar remained a car that demanded attention and skill. Tragically, the Cougar Eliminator's potential for excitement often came with real-world consequences. Its high-revving nature and tail-happy tendencies made it disproportionately represented in street racing incidents and driver mishaps in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Police reports and insurance records from the era frequently cited the Cougar Eliminator as a car that could spin out of control when abused, and numerous accidents involved young drivers who underestimated its power or overestimated their abilities. Yet it is precisely this combination of danger, rarity, and performance that makes the 1969 Mercury Cougar Eliminator Boss 302 so legendary among collectors today. A car that was both intoxicating and unforgiving. A hidden jewel of the muscle car era that rewarded respect, skill, and daring.